said the notion of directing a film is the invention of critics. The whole eloquence of cinema is achieved in the editing room. Yours truly, Avi Klein, says that while the naked eye accepts what it may see and radically appreciate that which is before it, the true magic is as hidden as any truth worth exploring. A finished product or the completion of any masterpiece that we see as a society and adore visually must always be recognized for the individuals who allow it to be as such. Such is the plight of the editor. My guest here on Wrestling with Anything But is an incredible talent, editor, director, writer, Michael Burlingame. Michael, how are you, man?
Hey, Avi, I'm good. How are you?
Not bad. Can't complain. It's Friday. That's always a good thing. Before we begin, I want to mention a special announcement that I have regarding Right Guard. It'll be made next week, so everyone listening that's been keeping track of that issue, there's some good news to report next week regarding Right Guard. Stay tuned for that. And Michael, we had Adam Ginsberg on a couple of days ago on our podcast. He spoke about an absolutely amazing documentary entitled 350 Days, which can be purchased on April 2nd. We'll delve into that soon, but Michael, when did you know that you wanted to delve into the arts from a literary or a visionary standpoint?
When I was, even before I went to school, probably like a lot of kids, I was reading comic books, so I knew how to read before all the other kids did. So I was always very interested in comic books. And then ultimately, I got very interested in film, when I loved going to the movies, but my mom had given me a paperback book, which was basically the screenplay for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And it was written in the format of a screenplay, and I always found that very fascinating. And one of the things that intrigued me was it'd say something like, the Sundance Kid looks up at the sky, and then it said, cut to. And then the next thing, and I was like, cut to. Those two words sound pretty interesting. So, and
needless to say, unless your family was in the business, they probably wouldn't be able to explain that as a kid. If you try to take an adult advice, they'd probably say, just keep reading.
It just reminded me that he'd say, get a haircut. That was the only thing he would think of. Get long hair back then.
That's, I gotta ask you something. So, before it's interesting that a lot of people have cinematic experiences that really get them started on their quest towards their passion. Are there any movies that you grew up that you just genuinely just touched you and moved you to the point where you felt like this is what you want to do?
Well, my parents gave me a TV, me and my brother each a TV for our room at some point.
Right.
And this was in Boston. And, I was watching Channel 2, which was the PBS station in Boston, and they were showing, old, cinema verite films and French films, Truffaut, and all that stuff. And I caught a flash of nudity on the screen, and then I was just hooked, And I was just waiting for that next flash of nudity, which never came. But in the meantime, I got completely seduced by that kind of cinema. So from a very early age, just because of my hormones, I got into Fellini, Truffaut, Godard, all those guys.
Oh wow, legend.
Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly.
I'm a film buff myself. It's interesting that, so in your adolescence, it's almost by happenstance that happened. Now moving forward, in your teens, did you even more involved actively, or did that not come until later on?
Yeah, it actually came a little bit later on. When I finally figured out I really wanted to be in filmmaking, I was in a school that had no filmmaking at all. So I had to transfer to another school, at which I completed all of my college requirements. So then from there in, I only took filmmaking classes and nothing else, which was cool.
Sure.
I didn't have to play basketball or do algebra.
I found that interesting that a lot of times you hear people, regardless of what their passion is or what they want to pursue in life, there is that obstacle. And a lot of times it's, you hear about guys who say, yeah, we wanted to play football, but there wasn't a football program in our school. In your case, it's with film. Did you find that to be a hindrance, or did you just tell yourself at that time that there's no way that any roadblock would get in your way?
Not really. The thing was, the barriers were a lot higher then, of course, than they are now.
Right.
And it was such an expensive endeavor. You had to be able to get grants, which I turned out to be good at. So I made a bunch of films. And the funny thing is, back in the 80s, I mean, I didn't really know anything about wrestling at the time, but I was making a film and in Massachusetts, and I cast Killer Kowalski in a role in my film just because I thought it was cool,
Sure.
And he was great.
Yeah, Killer Kowalski was, he actually had a wrestling school over there in Massachusetts as well. Very interesting that you were able to. So would you say that one thing led to another? Because we do want to bring up 350 days. There's a lot I want to talk about in terms of your filmography. There's so much to delve into, which we will. But in terms of 350 days, what transitioned, I guess, was it one of those things where it kind of, again, happened by occurrence, or it was a 7-year quest, from what I understand, actually, just to get it in the can?
Yeah, I came in after, 3 or 4 years of the quest. In other words, they sought me out after they had finished shooting. I wasn't involved with that part of it, but I know that Darren Antola, David Wilkins, and Evan Ginsberg, the 3 producers of different cuts of cloth, and the director Fulvio Cesare, really covered the story big time,
Right.
It's a very complex story that goes in many different directions. So they did all that, and then they came to me with many, many, many hours of material, mostly interview. I don't know how much exactly, but I think they talked to 70-something wrestlers, and for example, they talked to Bret Hart for about 4 hours. So it's in the hundreds of hours of
unreal. So there
material.
was were you overwhelmed in terms of how much you have to cut?
Well, it could seem overwhelming. Let's just say it was 130 hours of material.
Right.
I'm taking a wild guess. Now that can be pretty daunting, but basically, it's like reading like War and Peace or something. Don't look at how thick the book is, just turn the pages.
Sure.
So that's what I did, and, I didn't know anything about wrestling, which is strange because I would have been a perfect candidate to love wrestling growing up, because I love rock and roll, I love the Three Stooges, I love Mad Magazine, I love Marvel Comics.
Wrestling would have been perfect fit, sure.
Yeah, wrestling would have fit right in there, but it just wasn't on the radar, and I didn't know anyone who knew about wrestling or anything in Massachusetts, even though it was a big thing there. So anyway, in fact, when I had my interview with Darren, the producer, the creator of the project, after he had sort of felt satisfied by my qualifications, he said to me, he's like, "Oh, Mike, but just what do you know about wrestling?" And
sure.
I said, "Absolutely nothing." He said, "All right, you're my man." He wanted somebody.
I love that they approached someone from a non-fan's perspective, because I feel like if you were a fan or a diehard, and there's a lot of them, and there's nothing wrong with diehard fans of any sort of any form of entertainment, but it would have almost maybe stifled your ability to be unbiased in the editing room. Do you agree?
I do, because, the first, the interviews as they were on the hard drive and stuff, I just went through them in order, and the first one I started watching is Bret Hart. And I actually happened to know Bret Hart was because I worked with Bret Hart in the 90s. I directed a music video for WWF. It was called something like Slam Jam, We're All Together Now, and they took a bunch of wrestlers and put them together with a bunch of rock and roll metal guys. And we made a video with Bret, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker was in it, and Paul Bearer. So I knew some of those guys. But anyway, I didn't know Bret's significance or when I started the project. And I was like, Jesus, this guy's really well spoken. He's got, he's equanimous. He's got gravitas. He's looking back soberly at the past, and he's very analytical and smart. And I was like, that's not my perception of a wrestler. And I said, wow, this movie is going to be this really kind of sober and thoughtful look at the world of wrestling. So then I got through with him, and the next one was Superstar Billy Graham. I was like, wow, this guy's mirthful. He's looking back at his career and just chuckling over everything. So it's like the two of them.
We keep going, and then you go Ted DiBiase, who's another articulate guy who obviously, we can ponder and delve into his past and a lot of the interviews he's done. He's another individual who definitely recalls a lot of things. I mean, it's interesting that the perception of the pro wrestler, and that's why we call our podcast Wrestling with Anything But, it's to shed some light and give some of the guys we've had on an opportunity to kind of showcase that, number one, they're human beings, and number two, they have other interests.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's interesting that you had such a great eclectic pool of individuals who came from different eras. Did you find one particular person's interview or performer's interview just more difficult to chop up because there was so many goodies in there?
Well, Superstar, certainly, every word out of his mouth is a diamond, so it was like, it was a matter of trying to keep him out of the movie because he was so good. I was like, it's getting to the point where this is like the Superstar Billy Graham show. So, but in the end, there's a very good balance because, I was going to say that Brett and Graham are like the comedy and tragedy, the two theater masks,
Sure.
that buttress this film. And then the other 35 or so wrestlers who are in the movie fill all the gaps in between. Someone like Jimmy Snuka brought a real childlike presence to the movie.
Sure.
It's very interesting how in a way he seemed so innocent, and he just looks back in childlike wonder. And like a Greg Valentine, he has his own particular sardonic humor that really comes across, and that's something that people should know about this film. There's a lot of humor in it. As far as any wrestling documentary I've ever seen, this one's like, it's got a lot of laughs. I mean, I kind of thought that we could call it the 37 Stooges instead of, as the Three Stooges, instead of 350 Days, but that title was already since.
Now, in terms of the vision of the director, that's sort of two questions because they're intertwined, I believe. Did you find the director you were working with for this project? And you mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, his name was?
Well, Darren Antola created the project, and, he was a producer. The director is Fulvio Cesare, and he's an actor and a director. He was in Cinderella Man, a bunch of other movies and TV shows and stuff, and he's like a veteran actor who's done a few films. This is his first feature.
And in the post-production, who was actually sitting in with you when you were editing?
Nobody. I just did it alone. And
okay. Do you find that to be a little bit more? I've always talked to editors, and there's usually sort of an either-or formula to it, where some of them prefer to have carte blanche to edit as they see fit, and some of them just need or prefer to have that direction. Now, not being a professional wrestling fan, did you at all feel the need to have a director or producer sit beside you in post?
No. I mean, I learned a lot on my own, thank God for Wikipedia and stuff. And, a lot of it was, the language of wrestling. So,
right.
I found a really good lexicon online because the language of wrestling basically comes out of like carnival language, because
Sure.
they kind of have the same roots. So it's like a really colorful language. And I was like, what the hell did he just say? And I didn't even know how to spell it, but then I would find out. But as far as how to work, since they wanted a human interest story as opposed to, a nuts and bolts wrestling thing where I would have to be an expert, I understood humanity, even if I didn't know much about wrestling at the time. So I knew it was worthy of the film. And if you don't work with a producer or a director at your side, it's more like, that would be, you could call that a conversation if you're working side by side. And if you're not doing that, that would be you writing a letter to the editor and waiting for to the producer and waiting for his answer. In other words, I would state something, fully realized, get it to them, then they could react to it.
Right.
But I think a lot of editors prefer to work, alone.
Of all the subjects, in all of the genres, of all the pieces that you've edited in almost a 30-year career that you've had, would you say that professional wrestlers would give you the biggest challenge in terms of providing the most sufficient material because they're very well-spoken individuals?
Well, if I would compare it to other things I've done, I started out basically as a documentary guy who would go on the road with the rock bands and stuff like that. And I would shoot sort of behind the scenes documentary stuff. Then I would come back to New York and edit it. And I did that extensively with Paul McCartney, Sting, and a few other people.
Right.
And, like Sting, not the wrestler Sting,
of course.
Sting, the singer and the bass player. He was a nice guy, but he just didn't give a rat's ass if there was a camera aimed at him or not. He wasn't going to change. I remember one time I knocked on the hotel room door because I wanted to get some footage, and he was laying on the couch reading Time magazine, right? He's like, "Come on in, Michael," you know? And I started filming, and he doesn't do anything. He's just turning the pages, you know? Sure. And I was like, all right, that's pretty riveting, you know? So he didn't really care, but we still would managed to get good stuff. But these wrestlers, they brought so much to it, you know. They were all so fascinating, and they were also interesting, you know. Some people can talk about their careers in kind of a very boring way, but they weren't like that. They were just like so eloquent and so funny. And I got to tell you again how funny this movie is. There's a lot of laughs.
From what I understand, I mean, were you editing simultaneously between 350 Days and Partners?
Was I doing 350 Days simultaneous to what?
With Partners as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, how'd you know about Partners?
Just some homework.
Yeah.
You know what it is? I can't be a hypocrite. I tell my students to do their homework. If I didn't, I'd be a hypocrite. So.
Yeah, I was just coming off the tails of a movie I edited for a director named John Spellos. And right. It's a very interesting movie. It's about a well-known photographer who struggled to continue to work and do photography as he slowly went blind until the point where he was completely blind.
Oh, wow.
Still working. And so that was pretty interesting. And I was tailing out of that when 350 came along, which was great. And Partners, I almost think maybe I tailed into that as the bulk of 350 had been done, you know.
Right,
right. The editing was about 2 months of preparation, took 2 months to watch all the footage and log it and organize it, and then you started editing for 3 months or something like that. So it was probably like a 5 month. And then there was whatever. It just
What was the toughest, and it's such a vague word that I'm using here when I say toughest, but for you personally speaking, or professionally as an editor, what was the toughest project to edit?
The toughest project to edit ever? Well, back in the old days, editing was just tough in of itself, you know, because you had 2 videotape recorders and you're actually, it was like making a mixtape on cassette, right. You know, you were actually recording over 3/4 inch tape. I had gone on the road with, this was my first gig on the road actually. I toured Europe with a group called Extreme, which you may remember.
I do.
More Than Words. Number 1, More Than Words. That was their big hit.
By the way, I actually remember that being the only song, I'm outdating myself here, More Than Words was the only song that made it to Headbangers Ball that was considered like a slow song that I actually loved.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that amazing?
Amazing.
That was the anomaly of their repertoire at that point, and then they actually tried to go more into a Beatlesque direction with their career, and that pretty much sunk them because right. People wanted them to be the Porn Graffiti type guys, you know, sure. The Little Jack Horny. But anyway, so they sent me on the road for 3 months in Europe with them, and I was shooting film. It wasn't tape, so it was a very complex process, and I was my own sound guy and everything. And Jesus, I got back to New York with so much material, just like it was ridiculous.
Oh my God!
And it took like a year to edit it. So I think that was the most challenging, just because of the way the technology was at that time. You know.
Do you find it to be difficult also working with editors in the field who may have more of a vested interest or a different philosophy, or do you find yourself to be someone who kind of just is able to adapt and work with anybody, regardless?
Well, I have been in the position, well, as a director, sometimes I've used other editors, and also I've supervised editors where I wasn't the director. And I find it to be very rewarding because I like to give people a lot of personal freedom right. to create, so they bring their best energy to the table. You know, it's not just me barking out numbers, sure. and they're supposed to push buttons, you know. So I enjoy that. You know, I think I like to be in a capacity of supervising creative people and giving them their freedom.
What was it like directing some of the AHA videos?
Well, you really did do your homework. That's kind of a misnomer. That's the wrong word. But I was just credited as being the director of, basically, they had a bunch of footage of AHA that was laying around, that just random people had shot. There was no director or anything. And they gave it to me, and they said, make a music video out of it, you know? And just by default, they called me the director. But I never met those guys, even though, you know, I think they were great, you know?
Of course.
But, yeah.
Was there a particular band or musician in the field of music, was there anyone who gave you a difficult time?
No, most of them were sweethearts. And people used to tell me, you know, watch out for Mariah Carey, you know, she'll eat you alive and stuff like that. But she was always so nice, you know. It was funny. She had a little dog named Jack, you know, like a little tiny terrier dog. Everywhere that she went with this dog, Jack. And we were in the editing room. Her producer's name was also Jack. The dog jumped up and ran out of the room, and Mariah comes running out, and she's yelling, Jack, Jack, Jack. And the terrified producer, you know, he comes running up with his tail between his legs, not the dog. But I edited a...
By the way, I can sort of tell that Mariah Carey's okay, because if her dog was named Muffin, I would probably assume she's a diva. But the fact that she called her dog Jack is pretty cool, I think.
What?
The fact that she named her dog Jack is pretty cool. Just Jack, you know?
I know. I guess it was Jack Russell, that was why.
Oh, there you go.
But anyway, probably the toughest, everyone was so nice. Paul McCartney was super nice. You know, they were all nice. But John Mellencamp directed his own music video himself and appeared in it. Right. And I got hired to be the editor. Of course, Mellencamp is in goddamn Indiana or something like that, and I'm in New York. So he sent his manager. He sent his manager to me to sort of supervise the edit. And before I started, he said, "Look, you know, just I'm going to get John Mellencamp on the phone here, you know, so he can tell you, you know, what he wants."
Right.
And John gets on the phone. And he goes, "You know, I don't know. I heard something about you, you know, because I was editing at Sony Pictures." And he goes, "The Sony folks said good things about you, so I want you to just take a look at this footage, because I got some of the greatest footage you're ever going to see, and you just put it together the way you figure best, and I'll bet you $1 that you're going to nail it. It's you're going to nail it." So okay, I say, "All right, John," and I edit for a few days. The manager doesn't have any input here because he doesn't know what's going on. I just do what I think is best for Mellencamp.
Sure. And
we send him a rough cut. And I show up to work the next day, the manager's sitting there and goes, "You're fired."
Oh, my God.
And I said, "Well, tell John I want that $1."
I was going to say, it's safe to say you didn't get that $1 ever, right?
Exactly.
Told you a buck. By the way, really good John Mellencamp impersonation. You nailed it, I think. The following performer is someone who, from what I've heard from the people I've interviewed, it's either or, it's hit or miss. In terms of maybe he's just having a bad. We all have bad days. We're human beings. But Bob Dylan, he seems like an individual that isn't quite interested in speaking to the media or fans. What's your take on Bob Dylan from a personal standpoint, if you met him?
Well, here's the thing. I never met Bob Dylan either. I've met a lot of people. And the Dylan thing was essentially the same as the AHA thing. Dylan was doing 30th anniversary concert in 91 or whatever with a lot of big stars, and it was like a live telecast and stuff, and they needed an intro. So they basically just put me in, Dylan's offices were in Union Square, and it was really fascinating to be there because you could really feel his presence. And they just put me in a little room, you know, in the back, and I just figured out how to make like a really cool intro for the thing. And since it was all archival footage for decades, you know, they just said, "You're the director." So I did get to meet Dylan, but I was alone. He had his own little editing room in the back, and I'm just alone there all day. There's other people in other parts of the office. So I started nosing around, of course, and I found, like, in the closet that there was a box, and it was full of harmonicas and neck braces.
Wow.
I thought, oh, my God, you know?
Sure.
And then I'm looking, and on the shelves, he's got his personal tapes, and one said, like, jamming with Hendrix, you know? And I was, like, so tempted. I was so terrified. And I said, you can't steal from Bob Dylan, and you can't even listen to his stuff. I said, what should I do? So I just finished a film of my own.
Right.
And so I just brought a VHS copy of it and slipped it on the shelf. So instead of stealing, I did the opposite.
I mean, listen, I understand if you have that respect factor. The next best thing is actually what you did, so I completely understand that. One of my favorite documentaries that you were involved in was 900 Nights.
Oh, yeah, Janis Joplin.
I mean, if you're talking about Janis Joplin, I always found it interesting when I heard it. The voice is Rip Torn. As soon as I heard that voice, I'm like, that's Rip Torn narrating it. It's just interesting, but like such a good piece. Do you find some of the, when you're looking at footage that's already been shot, you're looking at some of the material that's already been cut and edited, is it one of those situations where you don't have to do much just to get that extra polish on it in the editing room?
Well, yeah, because archival footage is always gold, you know. And we got some good stuff in 350 days. It's funny, I went from 900 nights to 350 days. Yeah, that was a really great project, and we wanted to get Jack Nicholson to narrate it, right? Which is a pretty big long shot. And this was back in the year, this was in the year 2000. But he actually responded, and he's like, "I love Janis very much, but it's just not the kind of thing that I do." And I just said, "How about Rip Torn?" And he was great.
Oh wow! So that actually came from me. That was something that you proposed.
I proposed that, and then later people said they thought it was Richard Nixon, because he brings a little bit of that. And then Janis, in 1966, Janis did this. He brings a lot of that to it.
Yeah, it does. I think it brings a lot of the. Rip Torn has a way of being entertaining, but at the same time bringing a lot of credibility just based on how the tone of his voice, his pitch, everything. I thought that was such a nice touch. So that was a good decision. Yeah.
He had great stories, too. He told us about Dennis Hopper pulled a knife on him in a restaurant, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. What do
you think about in terms of some of the musical analysis software out there? You got Beatroot, you got Kaima, Pure Data. Is there anything you prefer?
I don't know what those things are. I'm kind of a Luddite.
You know what it is? I actually give you credit because you've been in the field for so many years that right now it seems like a lot of people are sort of transforming themselves from artists into editors. What are your thoughts about some of the people right now who are editing their own projects or their own film? Do you think they need to detach themselves sometimes from their own product?
That's an interesting question. From their own product or from the world around them of stuff that could influence them?
Sure. I mean, more or less from the project that they're currently undertaking. They feel they need a lot of them in post-production to be more involved maybe than they should be. Do you feel that that's the case these days?
Well, too many cooks, as they say. That kind of thing is always dangerous.
Sure.
The editor's first responsibility is to the audience. And a lot of times that means protecting the audience from the other people involved in the project.
Right.
I'm not talking about Dan and Fulvia or anything. I'm speaking in general. Let's say other projects, but not 358. A lot of times editing is basically just playing defense and with the audience as the patient, and you're the doctor trying to save them from the disease,
Sure.
which is the producer.
I mean, a lot of the early films, they were short films that were just one long static lockdown shot. Do you feel that a lot of times the productions that don't have B-roll, they don't have reaction shots, and in essence, a lot of the times the editors get either blamed or don't produce the magic that a director assumes that they should? Do you feel like a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of productions in the pre-production phase aren't ready?
Well, Partners, which I did, had no B-roll at all. It's just people talking to camera. And once you make that kind of a commitment, people generally will go with it. They'll say, okay, that's what this is. But if you introduce a little B-roll or a picture here and there, it's like, you've given them a taste, so you have to deliver. You have to go one way or the other. He presented partners to me as sort of a My Dinner with Andre kind of thing, just keep talking.
Sure.
350 days, we wanted to have as much as possible. And, everybody, Evan, Darren, David Wilkins, Fulvio, and myself, we worked pretty assiduously to get the best footage, the best photos, and Darren and Dave were reaching out to fans, and fans contributed a lot of photos that really, I think, set this apart, because it's
definitely
special to see those kind of unguarded moments that a fan will get as opposed to some publicity shot,
Would you agree that one of the most underrated inventions in terms of machinery in the last 50 or 60 years was the Moviola?
That and the electric can opener, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Moviola was so interesting. I mean, helpful for editors because it just sped up everything a little bit, right? Made things more precise.
Yeah, I never used a Moviola, but when I was in film school, we edited on Steenbecks, which were perhaps an improved version of a Moviola.
Sure.
I always thought a woman on a Moviola editing looks like a seamstress,
right?
Putting together a jacket or something like that. Where a Steenbeck was more of a flatbed table of editing, but I guess nonlinear editing is probably the biggest advance. Because, if you look at, if you go on the set, if you look at a light,
right,
it's the same light that Charlie Chaplin used. That hasn't really gone, so far.
Not that drastic from how it was years ago, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But, nonlinear editing revolutionized everything. And, of course, it flooded the market with editors. Now everyone's an editor.
Is there any type of program, I mean, we talked about this a bit earlier, but I guess current programs that are around today, you got Avid, Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro. Is there anything that you prefer of those?
Well, because the producers started this project so long ago, when they started it, Final Cut Pro was still the industry standard.
Sure.
Final Cut Pro 7, not the current 10 or whatever it is.
Right.
So they were compiling the project, building it into Final Cut Pro, so that was the way I finished it, even like last year. And it was hard, because after you actually finish, you have to go to another post house for color correction or whatever, sweetening, and a lot of these houses don't even have Final Cut Pro anymore. But we found a really good one that was called Park Avenue Post, and now they're called Kettle Media Concepts, and they're great.
Right.
But I think Final Cut Pro was the most elegant.
Right.
And it's a shame what happened to it. Apparently, Premiere is the standard now, but I kind of prefer Avid to that because I started out on Avid. Because Avid was the first nonlinear before Final Cut Pro.
Do you agree that a lot of young editors today, in terms of just studying the technique of continuity, should go ahead and check out some of D.W. Griffith's work, like The Birth of a Nation, Intolerance?
Yeah, I mean, that is editing at its finest,
Sure.
And then there's the Russian guy who did the psychological test with editing, where he shows a man with a blank. Yeah, I guess that was his name. The guy with the blank expression, and then they cut to like a child, and then you think that he's showing sympathy, but he's just blank. Cut to a bowl of soup, and then you think he's showing hunger, but it's always the same expression. And when we did 350 days, Greg Valentine gets out of a car,
right,
and it's supposed to express the. How grueling that was, being on the road 350 days. And he was like, well, what should my expression be? I just said, no expression at all. Because people are just going to read it into your face. You don't have to do anything. So he just looks completely worn out.
It's so interesting because it's the one process that's unique to film. I mean, the young students, they have to understand, you look at the other mediums, they originated elsewhere. Photography, art direction, writing, sound recording. Editing is the one process that's unique to film. And that's why I find it fascinating.
That is so true. And you know what's interesting, though? Because for foreign market, for the 350 days, we had to provide a complete transcript of the movie, which is driven by interviews. And so then, we had a transcript to it, and, we had to check for typos. I remember Greg mentions Wahoo McDaniel, and they wrote down something like Wally McDonald, So we had to proofread it. But reading it on the printed page, it was just like, wow, this movie could be a book. I mean, it stands up. It's a whole different experience to read it. But you're right. Editing is sort of film editing or video editing is kind of unique.
Absolutely.
In the world, which is a pretty interesting thing, how it involves the importance of music. You have the movement of the camera. You have the spoken word. You've got all the stuff that combine together.
If you were to tell somebody who doesn't or hadn't had an interest in professional wrestling, maybe their entire lives or up until recently, and there's sort of a vague curiosity in seeing what 350 Days is all about, what would you tell them as someone who started out as a non-fan?
About this movie?
Yes. I
would say, if you have any interest at all in the human condition, this is a movie for you to see.
Right.
It doesn't matter if these people are cops, football players, lawyers, surgeons, chefs, whatever it is, it's a common life experience that they're telling you about here, and they're telling you with insight, and they're telling you with wit and humor. So I feel like it's really a movie for everybody.
You heard it, guys. Michael's been around for almost 30 years, not just as an editor, but I personally, from what I've seen as well, 350 Days is an epic. I mean, it's not just a story that you're used to seeing based on a professional wrestler's experience in the ring while they're in the ring. You're getting a human side. You're getting stories that are also candid because some of the people behind this project had familiarity. Evan Ginsberg is one of them. He had familiarity with some of the talent. And that definitely helps because they don't want to be in a situation where they speak to people or interviewing them that have an ulterior motive or don't know them or don't have that experience. And it seems like a very, very not only professional project, but I mean, if you talk about the 7-year quest from pre-production to post-production, it's amazing how much time was put into it.
Yeah, I would say. And I would also mention that the director, Fulvio Cesare, he acknowledges that he didn't really know a lot about wrestling going into it, but he saw immediately the potential of this project. And he did his just like you do, he did his homework incredibly. And he was great at putting the wrestlers at ease and just getting them to open up. Like he felt like Bret Hart had never really opened it up as much as he did when Fulvio interviewed him for the movie. So he did an incredible job getting the story out there, getting the people to basically he let floodgates open. So
that's such a good point, and I think that's why the production itself, as soon as you look at the people that were involved, from yourself to the director to Evan as well, you kind of know. I mean, Evan was involved in The Wrestler in 2008. You kind of knew that this was going to be a stellar production. I think that's why a lot of fans should be clamoring to see it. One thing I wanted to ask you regarding it's one question I actually didn't ask Evan when we had him on earlier. So regarding 350 Days, do you feel as if today, if a person who has any type of inclination to maybe sort of slander professional wrestling or professional wrestlers, do you feel like this will be an eye-opening experience for anyone who does have some sort of bias against professional wrestlers?
Because they think it's fake, for example?
Sure.
Well, the movie addresses that, and it's pretty interesting because everyone who wrestlers has a different take on whether wrestling was real or not. But, a lot of whatever you think about, whether, the moves we did and the outcomes of matches, whether that was real, I'll tell you this, gravity is real.
Right, of course, you can't fake gravity, right.
You can't fake gravity. And, my take on it was when people would ask me, because they say, I guess you know a thing or two about wrestling now. I said, yeah, I learned things along the way. And they go, is it real? I said, let me ask you this. Is ballet real?
Right.
No one ever asks if any of the other performing arts are real. I mean, did Bob Dylan really meet a tambourine man? Nobody asks those questions. So
right.
I don't see the point,
That's a really good point. A lot of the great, Bob Dylan wrote a lot of material, but a lot of the great musicians, a lot of the great singers out there, Nobody asks whether or not they write their own lyrics, if they write their own music. That's a very good point. They just accept the art, and I think if people accept the professional wrestling for the art form that it is, there will be a lot of respect for it. Sure.
I know, man. It's funny, like Barry Manilow, he would sing, I write the songs, but somebody else wrote that.
Right. Do you feel right now, moving forward, just to delve into some of what you have going on, what do you have coming up for yourself? Is there anything you're working on currently?
Darren has a couple projects in the fire that I think I'm not supposed to talk about because he very coyly alludes to them himself without saying what they are. But he's offered me a few things, and I am starting a project for the guy who directed Partners. And Partners is basically a film about who have alternative relationships. Everything from prison relationships, like she's on the outside, he's on the inside, just like anything you can think of. You can learn a lot about conjugal visits if you see that movie. It's pretty interesting. But same director is doing a documentary about the underground performance art scene in Buenos Aires, and so I'm going to start that.
And what's interesting about Partners is that if you want to talk about something that's in depth, it isn't discussing, a lot of times in documentaries, the subject matter might be one or two couples they might represent the subject matter in its entirety. There are 15 partners discussing the choices they made in this. 15 partners.
Yeah.
And you get a pretty wide perspective, which is great for the viewer to take in.
Yeah, exactly, because they come from all different walks of partners, so to speak. But yeah, I'm impressed that you know so much about that movie. Kudos to you, man.
Is it safe to say, and there's either, again, I like to use the term either or because a lot of the people that I meet today don't have the time, patience, or maybe, quite frankly, some of them maybe don't have the brain matter to discuss things in depth. They'll either say they like something or they don't. So it may sound like a vague question, but are you a fan of the Michael Moore documentaries?
I'm sorry, the what documentaries?
The Michael Moore documentaries.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. I think that, what was the Flint, Michigan one called there? I forget now. Flint or whatever.
Fahrenheit 9/11, Bowling for Columbine.
I think the first one he did, I think he was a little unfair to Charles Heston in the first one. Or maybe it was it was either Roger and me or Columbine because Heston was the head of the NRA at the time, and I feel like he was a little unfair to him. Overall, I think Michael Moore is good. I think it's interesting when someone tried to do a documentary about him. He did everything he could to stonewall it. Meanwhile, he expects complete transparency. I worked for him actually.
Oh, did you?
I met him.
Wow.
Yeah. He was doing some show. I forget what channel it was on. It was a TV show, and Michael Moore presents something.
Right.
And basically, he was doing a bunch of man-in-the-street things, and he was trying to show how he was trying to target like people who look wealthy, and he was trying to show how out of touch they were with the common man. So the interviewer would go up and say, "Can you tell me the price of a quart of milk?" Or what's in a Happy Meal? And asking all these questions. And there was one guy who didn't know any of the answers,
Right.
But it turned out it was because, he was from a different country. I was like, dude, you can't use this guy. He just doesn't know because he's just visiting. He doesn't know American stuff like that.
Sure.
Come on, it's gold. It's gold. You got to put it in.
Michael Moore, he gets a bit of a bad rap, but I feel like if you have a platform and you can differentiate between what's fact, what's fiction, and what's the filmmaker's take, and you can enjoy the ride but also learn a couple of things, I think that's the prerequisite for a documentary, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
What are your thoughts, just against some name association? I'll drop some names and tell me what you think about them. Werner Herzog.
He did, I saw this documentary he did, I forget the name of it now. I forget what it was about.
Yeah, he's done so many. Absolutely.
Anyway, I think he's brilliant. I love
his precision. I love his precision and his patience as a filmmaker.
Yeah. Guy's amazing.
Are there any documentaries that you've seen lately that you say that you just really enjoyed that maybe came out of nowhere, or you just kind of flipping the channels and you came across something and you decided to give it a chance and it was amazing?
Well, 350 Days is being distributed by a group called Gravitas Ventures. So, and they have a lot of documentaries. So I decided to start looking at some of the titles. And so I watched a documentary called For the Love of Spock. Have you seen that?
I just saw that last year, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and that was made by Son.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was nice. And I'm a big fan of certain comedians, and one of them is Gilbert Gottfried. And Gravitas Ventures was the distributor for Gilbert, but there's a really nice documentary showing the side of Gilbert that people did not know existed.
I love Gilbert, but you're right, I probably have no knowledge. I mean, I think he's one of the most underrated comedians of all time. He's so funny.
He is, and he's evolved into something incredible. Sure. He's got Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast is brilliant that you can listen to. It's just examining pop culture. But anyway, those are just the two that I've seen recently, you know.
There's so many out there. I mean, the genre has become widespread. There's self-examinatory documentaries. You have the shock value I mean, Morgan Spurlock is great when it comes to just shock. He just gets his audience. He knows his demographic. He reaches out to a demographic that definitely wants to get shocked and learn more about current society and topical issues that don't get discussed as much that are in your face. Because he really digs in deep. I almost feel like when he grabs you by the throat, he doesn't let go.
I would say so, yeah. His debut was quite interesting, that Super Size Me thing.
Oh, my God.
I thought he was just going to carry on like his next movie would be, for this movie, I will hit myself over the head with a shovel every day for 2 months and see what happens, you know, but he went in a different direction.
He did. One guy that doesn't get mentioned a lot, I think, that deserves the credit is Ken Burns. Ken Burns is a really good filmmaker.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that he's talked about, just again raising the awareness and consciousness of people in terms of some of our history itself. The patience and the practice of a documentary filmmaker today, it seems a bit rushed, and it's great to see some of the guys who are still taking their time at their craft. And one thing I want to bring up again with 350 Days, it took 7 years, folks. I know you're going to have Q&A questions for me. It took 7 years for this project to actually get it finished up in post-production. Why? Because there was a lot of material. It's great production is behind this. They want to make sure that the consumer actually has the best product in front of them when they're watching. And are there last thoughts or comments you want to make regarding 350 Days?
Well, I think World War II was shorter in duration than the production, right?
If you think about it, it was officially 6 years.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know,
39 to 45.
I don't want to compare this to an international tragedy. No. What last thoughts on 350 Days? You know, I've seen it so many times as editor, and when I go to screenings of it, I just enjoy it. You know, it's just like, you know, there's certain things. You know, it's like hearing Gilbert say the same joke. I could listen to him tell the same joke 100 times and not still laugh. You know, so sure. I just think it's a great movie. The director did a great job. Everyone did a great job making it happen. And the fans brought so much to it with their photographs and stuff that, you know, they deserve to see it.
Absolutely.
See it.
I have some information. April 2nd is when they can purchase. Do you have some information about it as well? Or I know April 2nd is the date where fans can actually go ahead and watch this, purchase this, stream this.
Well, they can get it. What they can do that will help the producers of the movie is they could, if they're going to buy it, if they don't wait till April 2nd, they go to iTunes and just pre-order it now, and that will help them get to better platforms for future distribution. And it can be also pre-ordered at Best Buy. What's the big one there? Amazon and Turner Classic Movies. And the easiest way to do it. Yeah, and the easiest way to do it is to go to the website for the movie, which is 350daysthemovie.com, 350daysthemovie.com, and then there's buttons there for buying the movie, getting the DVD or the Blu-ray, or stream it or download it from iTunes. And they also have cool T-shirts and hats
That's great. And again, fans, 350days.com, 350.
350daysmovie.com, I think.
350daysmovie.com.
It was on movie.com.
And April 2nd, you just heard Michael, so many platforms. iTunes, you can obviously view it through, you said even Turn to Classic Movie. I mean, wow, I didn't even know there were so many platforms to view the movie. That's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't either. That was a surprise. TCM, but they're pretty cool.
That's incredible. I got to tell you right now, it was just a real pleasure. Do you have closing things out? Are there any closing comments that you might have?
Well, your opening comments were so brilliant. I don't really think I want to take the challenge.
Please.
That just knocked me out. So, I can't think of any good Orson Welles quotes except for what did he say? No wine before it's time.
It seems like you actually do good impersonations as well. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but when you did Mellencamp, that was pretty good. In about 2.5 seconds, you nailed Orson Welles.
Well, I'll tell you, I edited something for Dick Van Dyke, right? I never met him, but they had interviewed him, and I was going to be the editor. And then afterwards, he started sort of directing. He was like, the editor might need a couple of thoughts there of my family. Get some B-roll for the editor. So I was like, Dick Van Dyke was talking about me. I told my brother,
This is great stuff. We got to have you back again. Is there one thing I definitely wanted to ask you that it just kind of popped in my head before we sign out? Is there any advice that you'd like to give any young, upcoming film editor out there?
Well, I used to tell people when going into production, because they would always want a storyboard, I'd say, listen, if you want your storyboards to be accurate, do it after the shoot. Right? Just copy it. No, I'm just kidding. As far as advice goes, I don't know. I mean, as far as getting into the business, I think that's easier now than it ever was. So there's no need for advice there. I think you just need to, as an editor, you just need to be completely open and always be thinking of your audience. You are.
That's a good point.
You are the representative for the audience, and you have to take care of them and protect them as needed.
I like that. You represent your audience. That's really good. In closing, let's all remember that everything we devour in today's day and age should be prepared for us to do so as a way to maximize the very best of what it is we're consuming. Thanks to stellar editors like Michael Burlingame, we are able to do just that. And I do appreciate you coming on, Michael. We got to have you on again.
Thank you. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Have a great one, man.